Well, it's almost 2 years now since he passed on, but he remains in the hearts of many South Africans, and his music is still very popular in the country and across the globe, and that's an understatement. Affectionately known as the White Zulu, Johnny Clegg was born in England in 1953 and grew up in Zambia and South Africa and spent his formative years in Zimbabwe as well. In our profile feature today, we are looking at the life and times of Johnny Clegg with his two sons, Jesse and Jaron Clegg, who have, this follows, of course, the publication of this book that is titled Scatterling of Africa. Gentlemen, thank you for coming through. It is absolutely an honor and a pleasure to host you.
Thanks for having us.
Wonderful to be here.
Jared, let me start with you. This book, you know, when you're an anchor and you're preparing for an interview that's based on a book, it's good principle. Read it, you know, as much as you can. And if the time is limited, read key segments. I went in there, I was daunted. I thought, oh, it's going to take me a while to read and get a clever conversation going, an intelligent conversation going. But it turns out your father was quite the storyteller.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, when embarking on this project to kind of write about your own life story, he was definitely a man of narrative. You know, he really appreciated narrative, and he looked at, if not everything, most things in narrative. And he was someone who always looked forward. It was kind of his principle as kind of this warrior to always look forward and never gets hung on the past. But this book was definitely a moment for him to. He was a great storyteller, but to consolidate with his own story and to come to terms with it and to string a story out of this really wild life that he lived.
Yeah. Jared, tell me, how did this book come about? At what point in his life did he start really sitting down and saying, right, I know, you know, there's a lot happening, but I must start putting words on paper?
I think he attempted to write this book a few times over the years, and as my brother said, he was always someone who was so focused on the future and focused on the creative project that he was working on, whether it was a new album or a new tour, and it was hard for him to look back. But I think in the last 5 years, especially, you know, when we had to deal with the new reality of the fact that he had been diagnosed with cancer, and I think it put him into a reflective place, and he decided that he could really find the angle that he wanted to take, which was really to focus on his formative years of his origin story and how he discovered Zulu culture and Zulu music and how it shaped and changed his life.
So, and you're absolutely right. I mean, it says there at the top, my early years, Johnny Clegg, Scatterling of Africa. And it's important because until now, or until this book came out, when you talk Johnny Clegg, I would have immediately gone to start thinking about Scatterlings of Africa, Savuka, Juluka, etc., etc. It became about the work of the man as opposed to the man himself. Yeah. He was a man with many, many experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mean, there are many moments and stories in the book that even his family weren't privy to. I mean, when he really looked back deep and he dug in. And yeah, I mean, it ranges from, you know, the turmoil of this kind of political climate that was apartheid to embarking on this really like adventure of a lifetime, stepping through this window with this, you know, with Sipho, who was his friend, who took him into Zululand and like really journeying into this other world. So yeah, it is a soup of like
it's
very
an epic journey.
It's an epic journey. It is. It's an adventure like of a lifetime, and it just keeps. That's really what it reads as.
And in a way, Jared, it helped me understand him better. The book, well, the parts that I've read until this point, because I started thinking, here's a man born in England, with roots partly in the then Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, but also grows up in Johannesburg, the area of Bellevue. At some point, and then at some point he's in Zambia, and that's not even the full experience.
Yeah, and he was born in Rochdale in the United Kingdom.
Yeah. Yes.
So he wasn't even born in Africa.
Yes.
So I mean, it's fascinating when you see his early life and the chaotic early childhood that he had. and the difficulties that he faced, and how actually when he stumbled across Zulu culture and the friendships, the lifelong friendships that he made, and the warrior philosophy, it actually shaped him, and it was something that kind of saved his life in a way. And you really get that impression.
I don't know if I can abuse one of you while you're talking about him stumbling upon Zulu culture. This is somewhere in one of the chapters, but it's one of those quotations that you've put on the sleeve of the book itself.
Yeah.
Right.
The reason I like it so much is that I get a sense of someone who was poetic. And I don't know why this surprised me, because he was a songwriter as well. But I suppose I didn't think of it as in writing poetically, as in the written word, as opposed to writing music that he would be performing. This is absolutely stunning. This is where he describes the moment where he meets Charlie Mzila.
Yes.
And that was one of those turning points in his life. Please, could you read that for us?
There are moments in life that are pure and which seem to hang in the air, unhitched from the everyday world as we know it. For want of a better term, we call these moments magical. And when we remember them, they are cloaked in a halo of special meaning.
Wow.
Yeah, Charlie Mzila was the first friend he made who first taught him Zulu guitar and Zulu dancing. So he was a very special connection to my dad, and they remained friends their entire lives until he passed. And Charlie's still part of our family.
Yes.
On that note, I think the book also shows really all the key amazing people and players in his life who were across the aisle, who embraced him. Yes. Charlie, of course, being the first one.
And this was when he was 14 years old. And from what it describes here, there wasn't a conscientious decision to say, well, you know, the apartheid rules say you can't mix with this type of people. Well, guess what? I'm going to do exactly that. This was a young, curious boy and hearing a sound that sounded different from what he was learning in terms of playing guitar.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the thing that might be surprising to people when they read this book is that my dad was never political. You know, for him it was friendship, and he heard the music, and he saw the dancing, and he fell in love with the artistry and the community. So it was never something that was an intentionally, you know, he didn't know that he was breaking the law when he was 14 years old. He just met people that he loved, and that he loved the music, and he wanted to learn. So there's this beautiful, innocent curiosity that allowed him to find his way. And then later on, obviously, it became politically very complex. So it's an amazing story, and it's a version of South Africa that is so hopeful and so beautiful.
Yes. And the anecdotes are just incredible. I mean, here is this 14-year-old boy in the quarters where the workers would stay in Bellevue, going all the way to almost the roof of the buildings there, the apartment buildings, and strumming and playing this guitar that sounded really differently. But, Jaron, talk to me about your grandmother. From what I pick up here, he traces the story and goes back to your grandmother, but then also your great-grandmother and your great-grandfather.
Yeah.
But for now, it seems to me that your grandmother was quite influential in Johnny Clegg.
Yeah, just where to begin. I mean, Muriel, love you, Muriel, Gogs. She was she was, up until she passed, even in our family, she was an amazing matriarchal figure. And she was a key guiding force for my dad. In his career, but also in his life, she really did. He didn't really have a dad as much, but she definitely she gave him so many tools to face the world, and was also his biggest champion in his career. She would be taking his records that he would be singing with Sipho. These records, in the very early days, she'd be taking them to all the record labels, saying, "Hey, listen to my boy," So she was up until the very end, my dad's biggest champion, and it can't be understated how big a role she played in his life. Also musically, because she was a jazz singer herself, and in the house with my dad growing up, there would just be jazz everywhere and just pure chaos. She'd invite jazz musicians over, and and until the day he passed, my dad said, don't play me jazz ever. I don't want to ever listen to jazz. I don't want to ever hear jazz. Don't ever play me jazz. But yeah, so she definitely, musically, with his career and emotionally gave him the tools to,
yeah,
you know,
and I like the stories that he tells about the differences in terms of style, because she came from the cabaret and jazz background, and she just could not get what it is that he was now getting into in the early years. No. Guys, I know your dad had many isiZulu expressions. One of them that I remember at a performance, he would say ilanga seliyophuza amanzi, meaning it's, you know, in the evening, and I thought it was such a rich expression that the water is approaching where it drinks water, quote unquote, if we were to do a direct translation. So let me use another one to take us to break and say that you know, sometimes you must take a break and just let the music speak for a moment.